How are these latest inflation reports impacting central bank policy in those countries?
Well, Haz, what a trio of reports this morning, as you say, all above the Bloomberg survey median. If we take them quickly in turn, Korea, of course, fastest in almost a quarter century. That's certainly adding to the pressure of Fed hike inflation as well as imported inflation. But what we saw more troubling underneath the headline was that it was also a bit of demand side inflation as well. Hotels and restaurants recovering, giving more price growth there, double-digit transportation price growth. So it all makes it increasingly likely that the Bank of Korea goes with perhaps a half-point hike next week when they meet. They have been hiking by a quarter point in each of the 5 meetings since last August, but certainly feeling the pressure, don't want to be accused of falling further behind the curve, which is the worst thing you can tell a central banker these days. In Philippines and Thailand, Philippines came in at 6.1%. Unlike Korea, they've been here recently. Less than 4 years ago, it was at that pace, but it's certainly driving higher. The national statistician saying they're not quite at peak inflation yet. Of course, we had Governor Medalla on BTV this morning saying that a rate hike in August is all but certain at this point. They're just debating whether or not it would be 25 or 50 basis points. So far, ruling out a 75 basis point hike, which would certainly be quite high. And then lastly, Thailand, really quick, highest since 2008, another eye-popping number at 7.7%. They're one of the holdouts in this rate hike cycle. They typically don't like to move on the wiggles in the data, but these days, these central bankers don't have the luxury of going with their style. They will have to move soon. BOT has signaled that it's just a question now if they can wait until that August 10th meeting or perhaps have to move before at an unscheduled time.
Mitch, okay, sure, the central banks are pressured by the data here, but they're also being, I suppose, being influenced by what the Federal Reserve does as well. And, you know, it's a place to catch up to some extent as well.
Yeah, Rich, it's a really complicated picture. I mean, we're watching day to day. You've got to balance both the growth risks as well as the inflation risks. Both risks are rising higher across the world and in very different potent mixes for each economy. So quite complicated for each policymaker to kind of determine what's best for them. Certainly complicates things that the Fed is expected to move perhaps by 75 basis points later this month. We'll see also a very closely watched ECB meeting where they're debating 25 or perhaps 50. A lot of things that are kind of piling on the pressure for central bankers in this part of the world, and certainly we're looking at the risk of stagflation as both those risks rise, as the low growth risk rises, as well as the high inflation that hasn't quite ebbed yet. We've heard from people like former World Bank chief economist Carmen Reinhart that stagflation is a serious issue particularly for the more developing economies. So all of these things to watch. We've got a lot of central bank decisions in the next week, especially in this region. Australia later today, Malaysia later today, Sri Lanka, Pakistan tomorrow in crisis, and next week we'll have New Zealand and Korea.